started. I'm just going to turn the transcription off. Clearing. Right, that's done. So I think, so we're all recording. Hi, everybody.
Hopefully you can see the slideshow. Just let me know if you, just let us know if you can. So we'll just introduce ourselves. So I'm Jayne Fisher, and I'm one of the clinical leads for perinatal and infant mental health, and also for the parent-infant relationship team, which is affectionately known as the PAIR team.
And I'm Sally Smith. I am one of the other parent-infant relationship leads, the perinatal and infant mental health health visitors, and I work alongside Jayne in the PAIR team.
And so today the learning is around parental adverse childhood experiences and the impact that this has on parent and infant relationships. So I'll just get the slideshow so that you can see it from the beginning, and then Sally's going to start. So over to you, Sally.
Thank you, Jayne. And you'll be my my slide person, won't you? Yes, perfect. Just to say that there will be some time for questions at the end, but if you have got any burning questions while we're going through, just stick it in the chat, and I'm sure that Jayne will keep an eye on that for us. But you know, it's really informal. Just kind of chip in if you feel like you want to say anything, and we'll just take it from there. Okay, so I'm hopeful that you've all kind of understood and understand around the 1001 critical days. And what that is, it's from the moment of conception to 2 years, which is when we know that our baby's brains are growing at an incredible rate. So what's estimated is that neural connections are taking place at 1 million a second in a newborn infant's brain. And what we know is that those connections aren't necessarily hardwired into that child's brain. You know, they're not born with a predetermined blueprint. What we do know is that they are shaped by the environment that they're raised within and the interactions and the relationships that they form with others. So we know that while our brains are shaped by experiences in early childhood, a crucial role early childhood plays a crucial role in preparing our brains for the future. Because of the brain's unique plasticity in early childhood, positive and negative experiences can deeply impact the brain development. Positive experiences can promote healthy brain development in a young child, while the negative experiences may promote unhealthy brain development as the brain adapts to the negative experiences. What babies need to thrive and survive is sensitive, responsive parenting and sensitive, responsive relationships to be brought up around. So during this rapid time of development, we know that it's a real great opportunity, but also a time of extreme vulnerability as well. And what happens in this time lays the foundations for future well-being and development in that infant. Persistent difficulties in early relationships can have ongoing and persistent difficulties in every aspect of a child's development, both physically, emotionally, and socially as they grow. So next slide, please, Jayne. So what really is what this kind of quote is kind of telling us from Professor Eamon McCrory at Anna Freud Centre. And the Anna Freud Centre is a great resource for anything to do with infant mental health, abuse, and the impact on children. So children and their brains adapt to survive. When a child grows in an environment where abuse and neglect are pervasive, their brains will shape by those experiences. The brain changes may not lead to an immediate mental health problem. Rather, it's almost helping that child survive in that moment, putting them in that fight, flight, or freeze situation, but helping them to be able to respond quickly and in the most physically appropriate way. But over time, what the brain does do is that it doesn't learn quickly to flip out of that fight or flight or freeze situation. And that basically means that it can be really hard for that child to develop into it as they grow older, to respond in an appropriate way to very normal situations that they may find themselves in, such as difficulty sitting down on carpet time at nursery, or if something simple like they don't win a game with their other friends and peers, they'll probably have very different responses and outbursts to what a child born in a very nurturing environment will have. So next slide, please, Jane. So what this is kind of sort of saying is that parenting is an interaction of genes such as past parenting and current experiences such as the psychological state. It's all of these things working together to impact how a child is born and raised. So we need to remember that every infant is born to a mother and every mother was once an infant, and that non-verbal memories of the newborn experiences are stored in the cells and synapses of the brain. And these often do come back when a person then becomes a parent. Thus, this is what is experienced in early childhood and can impact how someone parents. So this is where we're thinking about that science of epigenetics. Epigenetics is nurture and nature both working together to present in the parenting style. Sometimes what can often happen is that those cells aren't switched on and off, or those cells are never activated or given the ability to activate because the baby's brain is in a consistently stressed state. And what we do know is that that's when that baby's responding in that fight, flight, freeze, friend or flop, those 5 Fs. If you want to know a little bit more about, I can definitely recommend a good podcast called Cribsiders, and that looks at trauma-informed care in paediatrics. And it really looks at that, how a child may present in that extremely stressed, hypervigilant, difficult, challenging state, and how then you can respond as a professional to kind of help to nurture and help those parents in that moment as well. So past experiences, just next slide, if that's all right, please, Jane. What we do know is that you may have heard these two terms before, those past painful experiences being those ghosts in the nursery. And that phrase was coined by a and what we also know is that we also can have those angels as well. Those are those good influences. Those are those good fairies. The ghosts in the nursery are basically traumatic or neglectful or abusive experiences, those adverse childhood experiences that happen to us as we're growing and forming and developing. And they are likely to come back to us when we become parents ourselves, or they may haunt us, the present and the new parent. They can impact on the way that we begin to relate to other people and relate to our babies as well, and then how we respond to our babies. And it can lead to things like defensive or defensive parenting or lack of empathy in understanding how that other person might feel, how that baby might feel, being able to be mind-minded or hold your baby's emotions in mind. It can also be how when babies cry that parents often really adjust to this very difficultly, and it can often be those cries that were never responded to as they were growing as babies and infants, or how those cries made them feel when they were small. When we look at those angels and those fairies and those positive influences, this can be a person or a person in that child's life as they're growing up that can act as a buffer for that stress. They can be that safe space and that safe base that children can return to when they are feeling like they need their emotions responding to, or that they need a little bit more reorganization. Now, angels could be grandparents, foster parents, friends, partners, siblings. They could be a professional, a teacher, and a GP. It could be a therapist. It could be anybody who comes in contact with that child that can give them that emotional reassurance and sensitivity that they need. There's a really good BBC documentary called Home Truths by Ian Wright, and he recounts his experiences growing up in an abusive family and watching domestic abuse happen day to day. And he identifies an angel in his life, which was a school teacher. It's a really good documentary to catch if you ever want to. Next slide, please, Jane.
Yeah, just to sort of butt in there a little bit, Sally.
Yeah, go for it. Sorry.
When you've got parents that have these ghosts in the angel, what you want to do is try and get them to think about the angels and how that made them feel. What was those, if they've got an angel in the nursery, how did they feel at that time, and then hopefully they can change their parenting if they're being ghosts to their own children, and sort of look more at offering those more angel experiences for that child. And for parents that cannot remember that any angels in the nursery, that's when we as professionals may have to become that angel in the present to give them that reassurance and that self-esteem to start to think differently about their own child.
Yeah. Okay, so I suppose we need to be considering what the importance of the internal world of a child and their developing mind, as this impacts on how they respond to these adverse events. We will provide all these slides for you afterwards, and you can also access the training afterwards on a recording, but you'll be able to click any of the hyperlinks that are within the embedded within the training as well. So I suppose if we think that if a child has had their needs met and they feel validated and emotionally, then they're more likely to be able to go on to adults at times of stress and at times when they have later adverse events. So they'll have somebody to go to that safe place. They'll trust those adults around them to be able to help them with any traumatic experiences, because internally, when they have had a metaphorical trusting circle, hopefully that kind of makes sense. I often think of Goldie Hawn, who experienced quite significant sexual attract when she was young, but because she felt secure with her own mother, she was able to talk to her mother, and she helped her make sense of what had happened to her. She often says that it didn't affect her that much because of that, and she knew that it was not to do with her because of how her mum helped her kind of break it down and feel. So if you've got a child who hasn't had their emotional needs met, who hasn't got a trusted adult, or doesn't trust adults fundamentally in the sense of not being able to be their true selves with them, or after often having to meet the needs of adults for them, then this can mean that they were able to experience more trauma as part of the original relational trauma, which in itself is really traumatic. But it just compounds things because they're more likely not to go on to adults to try to manage their emotions or manage their thoughts around very stressful and distressing situations. Often what this does is it causes a child to grow with being very open to extremely vulnerable, and to be more susceptible to mental health problems as they grow up themselves. What we can see there is that we know that these adults are more likely to use things like to cope in maladaptive ways, shall we say, so using drugs, using alcohol, risky behaviours, gambling, addictive qualities like that. Next slide, please.
So we're now going to look at stress, and Sally's already sort of touched on stress and the impact that it has. So there are 3 types of stress, and when we think about babies, positive stress is mild to moderate short-lived stress response necessary for healthy development. And for a baby, that would be they cry because they're hungry, the parent recognises they're hungry, they pick them up, they feed them, and so that stress dissipates. And for us as adults, it's that what makes sportsmen get onto a field. It's that we all need positive stress in our lives. And then you've got tolerable stress. For first child, that's more severe stress response, but limited in duration, and it allows for recovery. And tolerable stress for children is, is maybe parents splitting up, and for a while there's that turmoil. They don't see either, they might not see one parent as much as they had done before, but in time things settle down and they get to see that other parent, or they might have lost a grandparent who has died, and for initially that's really awful for them, but then over time you tend to get used to that and you tend to come to terms with it. So that's tolerable stress. And then you've got toxic stress, and that's extreme, frequent or extended activation of the baby's stress response system without the buffering of presence of a supportive adult. So these are those children that live in really toxic environments, that they're waiting for the next awful thing to happen. So if you think of a family where there's significant domestic violence, for example, or there's neglect of the basic needs, they're in that fight, flight, freeze or fade mode, constantly without the chance to recover and without the support of a parent, because that parent is going through stress themselves. So what it does is their stress response system becomes chronically activated, and this then, because of the parts of the brain that are involved, means that they have chronic dysregulation. They have high amounts of cortisol, and these are the children that, for example, I always use the scenario of in a classroom situation where the teacher might go and just tap them on the shoulder to get their attention. They'll turn around and smack the teacher in the face because they're in that over hypervigilant fight or flight mode, and then they'll get punished and don't know why they're being punished, because they're trying to keep themselves safe in the environment that they're being brought up in. Or the other scenario might be that the teacher raises a voice because there's a lot of chit chat going on, they might not hear him, and that again, that child who's been through who's living in a toxic environment or has lived in a toxic environment where they're hypervigilant, they'll hide under the table, they'll freeze because they're waiting, they're hypervigilant. And because of the parts of the brain that are affected, like the amygdala, the hippocampus, etc., they're parts of the brain that have other roles to play. So it can affect their basic immune system. So these children are more likely to get lots of infections and disease, lots of chest infections, lots of ear infections, because they can't fight them off because they're too busy fighting off this stress. They're the children that will have difficulty in focusing. They'll have poor memory and critical thinking difficulties, proneness to fear and anxiety, and impaired memory and mood control. And often they're the children that they'll then get punished for their response, but actually they're trying to keep themselves safe. That also what happens is their reward system is also impacted. So a lot of environments, a lot of parenting programs talk about reward and praise and using stickers, etc. And these are the children that will never get that reward, in schools where, if they've been really good, they get a certificate at the end of the year. They'll never be able to get that certificate because their stress response system and the reward system is so affected that they can't change the behavior. These are the children that need significant input from child and parent and infant psychotherapists and psychiatrists in order to reshape what is going on or what has gone on in their early years. So because we talk about that window of opportunity, what we know is that 60,000 babies leave hospital every year to live in fear and in their households. And we know in Wakefield that 50% of our children will have a insecure attachment style, with 20% of those 50% having a disorganized attachment style. And they're usually those children that are living in these toxic environments, these abusive environments. And that's right in childhood. And we have that 1,001 critical days when there's that period of rapid brain development. The brain is developing at the most rapid time in our lives is in that first 2 years, from conception up to 2 years. So they're absorbing a multitude of experiences and information. So negative experience can radically influence whether the child, like we've said, develops a healthy brain or unhealthy brain. The good thing is that the brain does remain plastic, and there is chance for recovery, but it's never going to be as good as if we put that intervention in before the brain hardwires and becomes damaged. Children adopt an attachment style, again, to stay safe in the environment that they're living in. So if you look at this picture, we use this in training, perinatal and infant mental health training. A lot of practitioners, when they look at this picture, think that baby's actually smiling. Actually, if you look, that baby's jaw is really clenched. If you look in their eyes, they're fearful. They don't know whether to laugh or cry. And that is known as frozen watchfulness. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. That is a child that's learnt, a young baby that's learnt to be hypervigilant because they're living in these toxic environments. They're their stress response system is on high alert. And because of that, they're the children that are unable to explore play or make joyful connections with people because they're trying to keep themselves safe in that environment. So they can't show, often they don't show a range of really good emotional facial expressions. And like we've said before, parents who are raised in highly stressful environments will adopt an early bias to be towards seeing their baby's facial expression in a negative light. So even if a baby's mirroring back a positive expression, because of what the parents have gone through, they'll interpret that as a negative. And so you get that negative cycle because the baby then copies what the parents is giving back to them. Babies learn about emotions through something called marked mirroring. So when a baby gives off a negative emotion, the parent should mark that, should mirror that negative emotion, but always mark it with a more positive one. So what that baby learns is, yeah, I'm feeling like this. My parent recognizes I'm feeling like that, but they can make it better. But if you think of a child that gets a negative response back to a negative, so it's not marked with a more positive emotion, they get a negative back, they get that negative cycle as the baby copies. So they never learn about their own emotions and the impact they have on anybody else, but they learn that they're not safe with that parent because they're not marking it with a more positive facial expression. So they learn to be fearful of their own parents. So Anna Freud Centre, which said before, is a really good, they work with children who've gone through really traumatic experiences to try and support them to make things better. And they talk about trauma signs. We have to be really careful and put these into context of what else is going on in that family, because not only are these trauma signs, but they're also disengagement signs that all children will give when they're becoming a little bit overwhelmed. So we have to be careful that, we know what the background is. Is this trauma, or is this just a child that, is just saying the mum's been a bit too much or too little, and they're just trying to let them know that because they're coming overwhelmed. So babies do have a voice. They are right from birth, they're social, they're able to communicate. And by recognizing some of these signs, we can understand what that baby's trying to say. So they often show feelings of stress in a physical way. So persistent crying, which cannot be soothed by the caregiver, because that caregiver themselves are giving off lots and lots of cortisol because they're also feeling stressed because of what's going on. The baby might become rigid or arch the back, squirm or look unfocused, to physically trying to escape those feelings of distress. And they may struggle we tend to find these babies struggle with sleeping, with feeding or playing. They may have persistent hiccups or persistent vomiting, which are signs of stress response. And then when they're really overwhelmed, and they will cope by cutting off from their feelings. We know that very young babies and infants whose needs are not met on a consistent basis will shut off and will stop asking for them feelings to be met. They'll avoid eye contact with their caregivers. They'll stare at lights. There are a couple of ways that young babies try to self-soothe, but a precocious ability to self-soothe at a very young age would start to ring alarm bells. So the things that they do is they'll stare at lights or other objects for long periods, or they'll put their hands in the mouth and suck on the fingers. So if they're doing that all the time and not responding to the caregivers and not coming back to join in that serve and return play that they need, then there may be something going on there. It may start your warning signs in us as practitioners. And obviously, if they're showing a limited amount of emotions, if we can't get them to smile or respond, there might be something else going on there. So I think this is you, Sally.
Yeah, so the hand-brain model, the hand-brain model is a really good way of being able to describe to a parent what is actually happening when babies are becoming overwhelmed. And I've used it before, and I think Jane, you probably used it the majority of the
lots of
time with children when they're around 2, and we're talking around behaviour management, and we're talking around helping parents understand what's actually going on for their child in that moment when their brains are becoming overwhelmed. So this this image here, it describes it in a really great way, but actually in the next slide, we've got a nice video by Dan Siegel, who came up with the concept. And I'm going to get Jane, are you all right to flip onto the next slide and then we can just play the video?
We can, yeah.
It should be embedded. There we go. Ooh. No sound? Not to worry. What I can do is,
I don't know what I've done there. I don't know why there's no sound.
Don't worry about it. What I will do is I will quickly see if this will work. Bear with me a second, and I'm just going to share this. Technology. Love it.
I mean, while you're doing that, I can actually go through it if you like. I'm just going to come down a little bit. So Daniel Siegel is a parent and infant psychotherapist, but he's also a psychiatrist, and who came up with this model. And he actually teaches very young children from about 5 to use this model to tell parents when and other health and other professionals. So, for example, in school, when they're going to have a meltdown because of obviously they're hypervigilant or whatever has gone in their life. So basically he uses his hand, and so your arm is your spinal cord, and then the hand, the lower part of the hand with the thumb across is what's called the he calls the downstairs brain. It's the limbic system. It's that primitive brain which is there from birth, and which very young children are really using that part of the brain. It's where the fight and flight system is, so your stress response system, and it's where the emotional system is. And then he brings his hand forward, and this is the front part of the brain here, and he calls that the upstairs brain, and that's where the executive functioning of for example, being able to manage your own emotion is. It's the prefrontal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex is really slow to grow, and actually does a lot of its development in teenagers, which is why teenagers are often risk takers, and also very emotional, and also very stroppy, if you like, again, because they convert back to this very emotional primitive part of the brain, because they're having this rapid brain development in the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is not actually fully developed until we get to the age of 25. So very young children rely on parents to help them emotionally regulate, to teach them how to emotionally regulate, and to be able to do that, the parents have to be able to regulate themselves. So what he says is when a child is having a meltdown because their emotional cup is empty, they don't know how to manage these big emotions because of that prefrontal cortex being slow to develop, and they need the parents to co-regulate them. They'll do something like they'll flip the lid. So what they'll do is they'll stop using that part of the upstairs executive functioning brain and go back to their emotional brain. And that's why they have these big blowouts and tantrums and etc. And what they need from a parent, and again, it's really good one to use with parents, what they need from the parent is for the parent not to flip their lid, not to scream and shout, which is difficult when you've got a child who has a lot of blowouts that's really struggling with their emotional regulation. And that's why most parenting programs now ask the parents to take time out and hand it over to somebody else who's not going to flip their lid. Because if you've both flipped your lid, that you can't you're never going to regulate that child. They need the parent to keep calm. So that's the base of it, what we used it for. But like I say, he teaches children that he works with that have been through really traumatic experiences where they've got, they may be the ones that have been excluded from schools because they flip their lid a lot. He teaches them to tell education and parents when they're going to flip the lid, so that then they can then take them to a nice safe space and be with them in that moment in a calm way, it gives that parent and or that educator or whoever it is, that person, chance to be able to bring their own, be alerted that this is going to happen, so that they don't respond by flipping their lid, if that all yes, if that all makes sense. And it is really difficult, and actually parents only have to get it right 30% of the time, and I think it's really important to stress that to parents. You know, there's no, we all flip our lids sometimes, don't we? Because it's really difficult not to. So, but if we get it right 30% of the time, then we're doing a really good job.
What I've done with the link to the Dan Siegel video, you can find it if you just put a search in on YouTube, but I've put the link into the chat so that you can watch it at your own pleasure. But Jayne's done a fantastic job at explaining it. So yeah, I'll let you go on to Circle of Security, Jayne.
Yeah, I'm just going to get it back up to the big one. So Circle of Security is a parenting program that we use within parent and infant relationship team, but it's also used by parent and infant relationship teams across the country and by perinatal mental health services, including our own. It's an international program as well as a national program. It's American. It's a licensed program that's based around 50 years of attachment theory. And a lot of parenting programs ask the child to change their behaviour at a time when we've just talked about that prefrontal cortex being slow to grow, where it's not, children are really struggle with their emotions and cannot. And we know that however a child communicates, they're trying to tell us a need, and so it's actually the parent's response that you want to change or allow them to understand. So the hands on the circle are the parents. The parents, just, or whoever that carer is, need to be the secure base to allow, so that child can go out in that circle to the top of the circle, and they need the parent to be with them to support their exploration. And when they're out on that circle, they have 4 needs: watch over me, delight in me, help me, and enjoy me. And then when they come back into that circle, they need the parents to be that safe haven, welcoming them coming back in. And it may be just for protection. It may be that they want to be comforted. Again, they may want them just to delight in them and show them something, want them to be involved in the play. And they also may want them to organise their feelings when, you know, think their emotional cup is empty, when they don't know what to do with those big feelings. They need that safe haven. So if we go back to the beginning, where parents have gone through adverse childhood experiences themselves, they may really struggle to be that secure base and safe haven, or they may be the secure base, and every time that child goes out, they're so fearful that they bring them back to the secure base, so they never go around the circle. Or there may be a parent that when they come back in and they need to organise the feelings, that they send them back out and tell them to grow up, and, you know, and or shout at them, and so they never get to the top of the circle, so they're stuck on the bottom. So it's important that they can, you know, they have the whole circle. And what we need is parents to be bigger, stronger, wiser and kind, not to go to weak or mean. And often that can happen, particularly, it can happen for us all as parents, but particularly if those parents themselves haven't been parented in a wiser and kind way. They can tip into mean, or they can tip into weak, where they give in to the child and give them sweets and toys and everything else, which is not actually what the child needed in the first place. Whenever possible, follow your child's need. And obviously we know that sometimes we can't do that, because if you've got to get your child to to school at a certain time, and then the child suddenly decides he wants to go play with his toy, then you can't follow that need. You have to get them to school. And whenever necessary, take charge, but take charge in that wiser, kind way, bigger, stronger way. You know, take charge by, you know, if they're running off on the road, you know, taking charge and bringing them back because it's not safe for them to do it, but, you know, in a kind way. Or if they're kicking and biting somebody, obviously you need to take charge, but you acknowledge that they've got these bigger feelings, and that, you know, although they can't bite somebody, you're not going to reward that, but you're not going to go into mean and, you know, have a real go at them because they're trying to manage these these big feelings. And also children very much miscue. So because they don't know what to do with those feelings, they will miscue. So they may be really destructive, but actually what they're trying to say to the parents is, I feel really sad, or to the teachers, something's happening at home and I don't know how else to express it. If you think again, when we talk about that hypervigilance, these children don't know how else to express what they're feeling inside, this feeling of being scared to go home, scared of the parents, scared of everything that's going around. The only way they know how to express that is through either negative, what we perceive as negative behaviours, or, by hiding away and being scared and hiding under the table. So what can we do? So obviously when we're thinking about babies, but also this applies to any child that can't really talk, or obviously if they can talk, it's about giving them that support around getting the feelings out, taking them seriously, and then acting on what they're telling you. But for babies and young children that can't talk, it's looking at other things. It's how babies, what are they experiencing? How are they saying what are they trying to say is, and also assessing that parent and infant relationship. What is it like? Are the parents sensitive? Are they responsive 30% of the time? Are they picking up on those cues? Are they being with the child when they're trying to play and involve them in play? Are they able to, put the phone down or stop arguing with mum? Are they able to find joy in that child? And again, we've talked about those cues of stiffening and diverting their eyes. And it's never too early to voice what you think a baby might be feeling. Sometimes we as professionals have to be the voice of the child, especially when parents really struggle to. Often what happens, we focus very much as parents on our own feelings and what something makes us feel like. So if you've got a crying baby, the baby's always crying, they're always wanting me to pick them up, the needy. But actually, trying to get parents to think about, well, you're feeling like this, I wonder what your baby's feeling like this at this moment in time, trying to get them to be mind-minded. What is it like for your baby being in this world that's really strange and everything's new? And that's really difficult when you've got for parents to be mind-minded if they've never had that themselves.
While Jayne's been talking, I've been putting into the chat some really useful links. So what I have popped in is a link to the Under 5s resources section from Anna Freud. And there's sections around things like change, around trauma, around sleep, around crying. And it's all coming from that infant mental health perspective, that emotionally sensitive parenting way. I've also put a link in there to Circle of Security. Now, there is a lot of limitations in terms of the Circle of Security website in terms of what you can and can't see, but the premise and the basis for it is there about the lovely infographic that Jayne just shared with us around the circle and what we're asking parents to be. So all of that's on there as well. Any questions? Anybody? Everybody?
There's nothing in the chat.
Nope. Like I say, that chat will stay active and we will put the recording onto the Wakefield Safeguarding Children's Board website, and you can find that by searching risk, resilience and trauma, and the lunchtime learning sessions will be there. There's also the history from the lunchtime learning sessions. So we did one last month about the importance of engaging dads, and we have there's the current programme for the monthly sessions as well on what's coming up until now and the end of March. Right.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. Thank you, Jess. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks everybody. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
This recording.